Part 1. The Fall Among the Crowd. Hook opening. What would you do if you saw a war hero pushed off a bus like trash? Would you film it, walk away, or stand up that morning in Jacksonville? Most people just looked away, but one officer didn't. It was 6:43 a.m., Jacksonville main bus station, North Carolina. Rain had just stopped, leaving a thin layer of sheen over the red tile floors. The air was still damp and cold. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead. People sat on metal benches, scrolling phones, sipping cheap coffee. Wesley Brant, 72, approached the loading curb slowly. He wore a faded boonie hat, an M65 field jacket fraying at the cuffs, and held a VA-issued paper bag filled with medication. His walk had a subtle limp, his right leg stiff, damaged decades ago. He took a breath, looked up at the bus pulling in. Diesel hissed, brakes squealed. As he stepped forward onto the bus, the driver wrinkled his nose and said it loud enough for half the bus to hear, "That veteran smells like war and whiskey." A few riders chuckled uncomfortably. The driver added louder, "This isn't a shelter, off." Wesley paused. He didn't speak. He hadn't needed to raise his voice in years. His voice, like his pride, had long since learned to stay quiet. The driver stepped forward and, with the authority of someone who thought no one was watching, shoved him back. It wasn't violent. It wasn't loud. But it was enough. Wesley stumbled. His foot caught the wet step. His knee, the same one that caught shrapnel in Kaysan, gave way. He fell hard. His hands scraped the tile. His VA medication bag ripped open, and orange pill bottles spilled across the dirty pavement. A woman in business heels stepped over his hand. A teen with earbuds walked past without even looking down. No one spoke. No one helped. Just phones. Silence. Shrugs. Blood seeped through his khaki pants where the fall tore his skin. Then, just for a second, Wesley wasn't in Jacksonville anymore. Kaysan 1960. The jungle was thick. Mud, mortars. He was 24. He dragged Corporal Denny under fire. Bullets whizzed overhead. "Keep moving," he shouted back then, heart racing. Denny had been crying. Now, decades later, Wesley was the one on the ground, crying inside. But nobody shouted for him to get up. Nobody noticed. Back in the present, he blinked. The world felt colder. He reached for a bottle, rolling away. His fingers shook. It read hydrochlorothiazide for blood pressure. Another one read clonazepam, PTSD. Another oxycodone, pain. Each one was a chapter. A price he paid for the war no one wanted to remember. He tried to sit up, wiping his palm on his pant leg. Blood smeared the fabric, but no one moved. Then, a memory again. Frankie, his best friend, laughing over a tin cup of black coffee in a foxhole. "If I don't make it home, tell Maria I tried, man. Tell her I wasn't scared." Frankie didn't make it. Wesley never found Maria. The bus door hissed shut. Comment below. What would you have done? Would you have stopped? Would you have looked away? Because 37 seconds later, a black SUV with military plates pulled into the loading lane. The door opened. From polished shoes to razor-sharp dress blues with a row of glinting ribbons, Captain Julia Monroe stepped out. United States Marine Corps, Camp Lejeune. 38 years old, eyes sharp, voice steady. She looked at Wesley. She didn't ask who he was. She saw it. She walked toward the bus, tapped once on the closed door. The driver looked stunned. "Sir," she said quietly. So clearly the entire station fell silent. "Did you just put a Marine on the pavement?" Part 2. The woman who stepped out of line. Hook opening, she didn't ask for permission. She didn't wait for backup. She just stepped into the silence and made everyone else feel small. The SUV door clicked shut behind her. The engine remained on, but Julia Munro was already walking straight, confident, controlled, her dress blues, immaculate, her boots tapping against the wet concrete of the Jacksonville bus station. She didn't look left or right. Her eyes were locked on Wesley Brant, the man still holding a ripped VA bag and a busted knee as if they were battle medals. By the time she reached him, a small group had started to gather, not to help, but to watch. Phones were out. Whispers hummed across the terminal. A woman in yoga pants asked, "Is that his daughter?" Someone else muttered, "She's too young for that." But no one dared speak directly to her. No one even moved when she raised her voice, not yelling but slicing through the air like a blade. "Who kicked this Marine off the bus?" No one answered. Julia turned to the driver, Walter Riggs, who now stood outside the vehicle with arms folded, chewing gum and pretending he hadn't done anything wrong. He looked at her rank, then at her face. He smirked. "You're gonna give me a lecture?" "Captain." Julia didn't blink. "No. I'm going to give you a name to remember. His." She pointed to Wesley, now quietly trying to tie his VA bag shut with an old bootlace. "He is Sergeant Wesley Brant, Vietnam ke San, 1st Marine Division. The man you humiliated this morning held his position under mortar fire for 3 days straight. How long did you hold your job without spitting on someone?" That line cracked the air. The silence was broken by a few stifled gasps. One teenage boy, still in his school uniform, lowered his phone, looked at his dad and whispered, "She just shut that guy down." But Julia wasn't done. She turned toward the crowd. "You all watched, every one of you. You didn't know his name, so you thought he didn't matter, but he matters more than most of us ever will." A security guard from inside the terminal finally stepped out, middle-aged, bored, with a clipboard in hand. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to keep things calm here." Julia raised her ID. "Captain Julia Munro, Camp Lejeune. This veteran was assaulted on your property. If you have a problem with how I'm handling this, file a report." The guard blinked, then backed away. "All good, ma'am." She turned back to Wesley. "Let's get you out of this rain." Wesley tried to wave her off. "No need, Captain. Not your fight." Julia knelt beside him and helped him to his feet. "Then let me fight it anyway." The moment felt quiet. Too quiet. That's when another voice cut through. From across the street, a middle-aged woman wearing a postal service uniform shouted, "I saw what happened. He didn't just get pushed." That man laughed after, called him a ghost. Gasps rippled. Now the phones came back up, filming not just for spectacle, but for justice. Julia turned to the camera and spoke directly. "Tomorrow, 06:30, 10 Marines in dress blues will be standing right here at this bus stop. We will show you what honor looks like. You're all invited to remember what you forgot." And that's the part that made headlines. You've probably seen the photo by now. Her silhouette in dress blues, standing beside Wesley, her hand on his arm, her other hand pointing back at the crowd. But what you didn't see was what happened after the cameras turned off. Julia escorted Wesley into the terminal and found him a chair. She handed him her canteen and waited until his breathing steadied. "You served with Frankie Haynes, didn't you?" she asked. Wesley froze. His eyes narrowed. "How do you know that name?" "He was my grandfather's best friend. My grandfather said Frankie died saving someone who couldn't stop apologizing for living." Wesley looked away. "I was the one he saved." Julia nodded. "Then this is personal." She stood. "I need a favor, Sergeant. Tomorrow morning. Will you stand with us? Let them see the man they ignored." Wesley hesitated. His hand tightened around the canteen. "I haven't worn my uniform since 72. Haven't been saluted since 69. Julia smiled. "Then it's time we fix that." She helped him into her vehicle, promised to get him home. And as they drove away, The crowd began to thin. But the videos didn't stop. Every major veteran page picked up the footage. Military forums lit up. Comments poured in from all 50 states. Some people wept. Some cursed the silence. Others just asked, "Where are the Marines now? You'll see soon." Because at Camp Lejeune in the barracks that night, 10 Marines were called in. The youngest was 23, the oldest a sergeant major in his 50s. Julia stood in front of them and said, "Tomorrow, we don't speak, we don't shout, we stand." She handed each of them a photo of Wesley Brant, bleeding forgotten, still sitting tall. "We stand for him, and every man who never asked to be remembered but deserves never to be erased." And as they saluted her one by one, she gave the final order, "Dress blues." Pressed. Boots shined. We leave at dawn. Because sometimes a country forgets, but the cause remembers. Subscribe now to follow the rest of this story. You'll want to see what happens when honor walks back into a town that once turned away. Part 3. The Wounds That Never Got a Name. It wasn't the fall that hurt him the most, it was the silence. And in that silence, every ghost he carried found room to speak again. Wesley sat by the window of his small house on Maple Drive, a one-story unit built in 1974 with peeling white paint, a screen door that squeaked, and a mailbox rusted by the years. The coffee in his cup had gone cold untouched. On the table sat a cracked photograph frame, black and white, 3 Marines crouched in the jungle. One was him, one was Frankie Haynes. The third was already gone when the photo was taken. Julia's SUV had pulled away an hour ago, but her words still echoed. "Oh, 6:30 hours, dress blues, we stand for you." He didn't ask for that. He never had. And part of him wanted to shut the door, unplug the phone, and disappear again. He reached for the folded flyer Julia had left behind. Brand Station, 0630 Memorial Formation. He folded it again, placed it under the old purple hard box he never opened. Then, without warning, memory came. Vietnam, Khe Sanh, February 1968. It was night. Rain hammered down like bullets. Wesley was 25, thin, sleepless, soaked to the bone. Mortars had hit their camp earlier. Bodies were missing. Screams echoed into jungle fog. He found Frankie bleeding near a trench wall, shrapnel to the gut, pale, barely breathing. "You stay with me, Frankie. Tell Maria I tried, man." Frankie's voice cracked. "Don't let them send me back in a bag." Wesley grabbed the man's bloody vest and dragged him through mud and wire. By the time they reached the evac point, it was too late. Frankie had gone still. Wesley didn't speak for 2 days after that. Back in America, he met Maria once, gave her Frankie's letters, then he disappeared. Now, in the stillness of his home, Wesley picked up a cassette recorder from the shelf. It was labeled Frankie, 1980. He hit play. A man's voice, deep, smooth, familiar, crackled through the static. "Wes, if you ever hear this, I'm proud of you, man. You saved me once. Even if I didn't come home, I know you tried, and that means something. Don't ever think you failed." Wesley turned it off halfway. His hand shook. He whispered, "I failed anyway." Then a knock at the door. Julia stood there in civvies, calm. No rank, no medals, just presence. "You said once, 'I haven't worn the uniform since '72, she said. "I brought something." She handed him a newly pressed Marine dress coat. His rank, his ribbons restored. He looked down at it. The weight in his arms was heavier than Kevlar. It smelled of starch, pride, and memory. "I can't," he said. "Yes, you can," Julia answered. "Because Frankie didn't die, so you could disappear." He sat back, the coat across his lap. Silence lingered. Then he said, "I wore this in Saigon, on my last night. I remember thinking, I made it out, but I don't know who I am anymore." Julia knelt, leveled her gaze with his. "You're a Marine," and tomorrow the Corps remembers. That night Wesley sat alone. The coat hung on the chair. He pulled an old letter out of a cigar box, Frankie's last one, unfinished. Wesley, if we get out of this, let's grow tomatoes. Let's live quiet. Let's not forget each other. He folded it gently and slid it into his dress coat breast pocket. Outside, rain returned. Inside, Wesley stood slowly, walked to the mirror, looked at himself, lined face, grey hair, eyes tired but steady. Then he saluted. Not to himself, to memory. Part 4. The line that would not break, hook opening. Would you still look away if 10 Marines stood tall in silence for the man you ignored yesterday? Because this morning they weren't just standing for Wesley, they were standing for all of us, to remind us who we forgot. 6:27 a.m., Jacksonville Bus Terminal. The sky still bruised from dawn. A line of 10 Marines in full dress stood shoulder to shoulder, boots, squared ribbons gleaming. Captain Julia Monroe stood at their center, expression, still eyes scanning. They didn't speak. They didn't move. Civilians gathered, drawn in by word of mouth, live streams, and conscience. Children with school backpacks, veterans in old jackets. A woman with a baby stroller paused. Even the mail woman from yesterday stood nearby, her USPS satchel slung low, eyes glistening. The moment held. Then from the far end of the street, a figure. Wesley Brant. He walked slow, cane in left hand, marine dress coat perfectly buttoned, purple heart pinned to his chest. His steps wobbled slightly, but his chin stayed high. In his right pocket, folded carefully, was Frankie's unfinished letter. Flash memory. 1972, Da Nang Air Base. Wesley, 29, boarding the last plane home. A young lieutenant saluted him. "I'll see you at the reunion, Sergeant." There was never a reunion. There were never salutes after that, until now. As Wesley reached the line of Marines, something happened. He stopped, raised his right hand. He saluted first. The 10 Marines followed instantly, hands snapping up in perfect unison. Camera flashes blinked like distant gunfire. Phones recorded, but no one dared speak. Even children instinctively stood still. Julia stepped forward. "Sergeant Brant," she said, her voice calm but carrying. "We stand today not because you asked for it, but because you earned it before most of us were even born." Wesley nodded once. His voice cracked. "Thank you for remembering. Thank you for coming." A teenage boy in the crowd, one of the kids who filmed yesterday, stepped forward trembling. "I didn't know," he said. I thought he was nobody." Wesley looked at him kindly. "You know now." The boy swallowed, stepped back. Captain Julia turned to the crowd. "This man didn't ask to be honored, but silence yesterday was permission for disrespect. We broke that silence today." She reached into a small velvet case and handed Wesley a folded flag. "This was flown over Camp Lejeune at dawn. It carries your name now." From behind, another Marine handed her a document. Julia looked at Wesley. "I asked the governor's office for something permanent. Effective this morning, this station is renamed." She turned to the crowd, raised the paper. "Welcome to Brant Station." Applause burst, not the clapping of performance, but the kind that comes when shame is lifted. From the shadows near the bus lane, a woman in uniform stepped forward. It was the regional director of transit, the one who had quietly signed the dismissal order for the driver, Walter Riggs. She took the mic and spoke simply. "We failed yesterday, but no one will walk this platform again without seeing his name." Part 5. The Man They Would Never Forget, hook opening. Sometimes the world forgets your name, but when a town stands still for you, That's when you know your story was never truly lost. The moment Wesley Brant stepped into formation and returned the salute, something changed. Not just in the air, not just in the station, but in the hearts of everyone watching. It wasn't just a tribute anymore, it became something sacred, something final and eternal. No longer a forgotten man limping through rain. Now he was a symbol, a living monument. A Marine who stood his ground even when nobody else did. The applause that followed wasn't wild, it wasn't loud, but it was deep, like a shared breath held too long finally being released. People didn't cheer. They cried, some quietly, others openly. Even the teenagers with their phones lowered their cameras and just stood there uncertain of how to react to something that felt bigger than social media. Then came the unexpected. An elderly woman slowly made her way through the crowd. In her hands she held a photo, a boy in uniform, smiling, the edges yellowed with time. "My brother," she whispered. "Frankie Haynes." Wesley froze. He stared at the photo like it was glowing. His mouth opened but no sound came. Julia stepped beside him, gently touching his arm. The woman spoke again. "He wrote to me about you, said if anything ever happened, I should find you. I never did, but somehow you found us." She handed him the photo. Wesley, the man who had bled and carried and never asked for thanks, began to cry. Quietly, like only warriors do, the Marines didn't speak. They just stood taller. By noon, Brant Station was trending nationally. The town mayor issued a declaration. Every April 5th would now be Wesley Brant Day, a day of remembrance for those who gave everything and asked for nothing. The bus company formally apologized, and Walter Riggs was not only terminated, but placed under investigation for past abuse complaints. Turns out Wesley hadn't been the first he'd pushed. But here's the part that no one expected. Walter showed up to the dedication ceremony 2 weeks later. He wore civilian clothes. No one greeted him. He didn't speak. He stood in the back, away from the crowd. And when the mayor called Wesley up to unveil the new station sign, Walter removed his cap and held it over his heart. After the ceremony, Wesley walked toward him. No one knew what would happen. Some expected fireworks. Others expected cold silence. Instead, Wesley extended his hand. Walter looked stunned, but he shook it. "I didn't see you for who you were," he said. "I saw what I was afraid of becoming." Wesley simply replied, "We all forget, but we don't all stay blind." That moment didn't make the news. No camera caught it. But the veterans who stood close said it was the most powerful thing that happened that day. A week later, students from the local high school began a project called Adopt a Veteran. Each student was paired with a local veteran. Wesley was the first to volunteer. He visited classrooms, not to preach, just to sit and listen. One day, a boy named Henry asked, "Did it hurt?" Sir Wesley smiled. "All of it, but not like you think." He held up the folded letter again. "It hurts more when you don't get to say goodbye." That's when Julia stepped in. She and Wesley began a new initiative, the Quiet Salute, a program teaching youth to recognize respect and record the stories of their elders before they vanish. Within 3 months, chapters opened in 6 states. Wesley never got used to being recognized. He still sat on his porch each morning with the same mug, the same silence. But now people stopped by to wave. Kids shouted, "Good morning, sir." A young man once dropped off a painting of him saluting in front of the station. Wesley didn't hang it. He placed it facing the window so it could watch over the flag outside. One quiet Sunday, Julia came by with news. Frankie Haynes's name had just been added to the National Marine Corps Memorial Wall. She handed Wesley a plaque. He looked at it for a long time, then whispered, "He finally got home." At dusk that same day, Wesley visited Brant Station alone. He touched the plaque with his name on it, then bent down and placed something underneath it. It was Frankie's photo, a note written in Wesley's tight, slanted hand. "You didn't die for nothing," I finally told them. As he stood up, a crowd had gathered behind him again, but this time he didn't walk away from them. He turned around, straightened his spine, and smiled. A reporter asked Mr. Brant, "What should we remember about today?" He looked around. "At some point," he said, "every man will fall. But if you're lucky, someone will still remember why you stood in the first place. If this story touched something in you, don't scroll past. Share it. Comment below what this flag means to you. And subscribe, because there are more stories waiting to be honored. Maybe the real question is, who are the Wesleys in your life, and will you be the one who finally sees them?"